I won't be able to see it because once I go to my slides like here, I don't have that. And so if someone could support me, if someone has access to audio, if there's questions about the presentation, if they could just let me know, that way I could stop and we could address those questions. Is that okay?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you so much. So, like I was said, I'm Jessica Danae Early Cha. I am a developer advocate for Actions on Google, and I'm super excited today to be able to talk to you about building conversational experiences with Actions on Google. So just want to make sure that people have access to the Slack group. I made a bit link. It's also on the bottom part of the slides, as well as the hashtag AOG devs. So if you are interested in connecting with our larger Actions on Google developer community, feel free to use that hashtag to connect with others. So I want to start off, before we go into the technical, to go more into how technology has changed, specifically in regards to how users interact with technology. So this is just a very, very rough draft of how every 10 years, there's a shift in regards to how users interact with technology. I'm going to focus primarily on the mobile because I vividly remember that kind of shift. And I remember back in 2007 and 8, not understanding why would I, as a user, want my flip phone to have the internet. Having something on mobile first didn't make sense at that time. And for many people, it didn't. But 10 years later, now I use my smartphone to call a random stranger to come pick me up and drive me around. And so my personal, as a user, interaction with technology has shifted completely in the last 10 years. And so we're seeing the similar shift now with AI and assistance. So this is kind of another layer and another way users can interact with technology, which makes a richer, better experience. After all of these kind of points, when it comes to technology from desktop to internet to mobile to AI, for the user's perspective, things have gone a little faster. We're connected easier, and we're getting a lot more done, and we're taking a lot more photos as well. So this, again, is more on the framework of how users interact with technology, and we're in this interesting space of AI and assistance. Similarly, to 10 years ago, when it came to mobile first and having Android apps and iOS apps, people weren't really sure what did that mean, and there wasn't that scaffolding of this is how you do X. And so we're kind of in that similar space where we're really playing around and venturing into what does assistance look like and be able to explore different options. And most likely in the next couple of years, we're going to merge with standardization of many of these things. So this is a really exciting time to get in on this because, again, nothing has been laid out where this is definite, and you have a lot of influence in this space too. So when in regards to Google Assistant is Google's approach to assistant and being there for our users. The goal is to be able to get users the ability to get things done faster and easier and to get information when they want in a way that makes sense to them. And generally, most people, we communicate vocally when we want to get information as well. So this is a very natural way that many users can use their voice to talk to Google and ask Google to do things for them. And so Google Assistant is this fantastic platform that we have that currently is on over 500 million devices at the moment. So it is readily available on multiple different platforms and devices. And what's really nice about Google Assistant is you just have to go, hey Google, or okay Google, and you can activate Google Assistant immediately. Apologies in advance if your phone or home or mini get activated every time I say that, but that's kind of the name of the game at the moment. So another really interesting and really fun thing about Google Assistant is that it's in multiple different languages. We're being very methodical and mindful of how we can support languages in a way that honors the language and is respectful and as useful as possible. So we're constantly coming out with lots more languages every day. And we even have it where for each language, we might have different locales because there's different ways that people communicate based off your region. Particularly, I'm going to point out English, where here we have US English, UK English, and AU English. So English spoken in America, in the UK, and then Australia could be really different. And so we're trying to be as supportive with our users as possible. So we have tons of different languages in Assistant. So that's great, but what does that mean for us as developers? Google has done all of these things. They're on Google Assistants on over 500 million devices. It's in multiple different languages. How can we as developers take advantage of this and be able to build something off of that? So I want to give some terminology first. First thing, Google Assistant is Google's personal virtual assistant. And this enables conversation between our users and Google to get things done. And so that's one kind of phrase that we hear a lot, but Google Assistant is separate. It is Google's own personal virtual assistant. Then there's the devices, where they are the physical things that we use to communicate to Google through. And in the middle, there's actions on Google. And here's the really fun part of this, where this is where developers can extend the Google Assistant, and we could build our own third-party applications as well. And so we're going to be playing in this world of actions on Google. So just some terminology, so then that way you kind of know who's who in the zoo. So actions on Google is pretty much like any other platform, like Android, like Maps, where you could build on Google's platform and be able to make your own third-party developer application. So another terminology as well is generally we use the term action in regards to an application. And so from here on out, you'll hear me say action in reference to app or application. So Actions of Google is just a platform that you could build your action that is now available on Google Assistant. So really similarly to how you could build an Android app on the Android platform. So how does this all work? Something I like to be able to go straight into is who is doing what in these different components. So we're going to first focus on the top part. Every column is its own identity. And so in this first gray column, we have the user. And the user is going to say something like, okay, Google, talk to personal chef. And then the device will hear that. That audio will get sent to Google Assistant, and that speech will be translated to text. Google is going to be using our own natural language processor, our own knowledge graph, our own machine learning ranking, as well as the user's profile to figure out what action is the best action to provide to the user. And so Google Assistant will figure out, okay, they're talking about personal chef, and so it's going to invoke the personal chef action. So from here on out to the right, it's going to be our action that we have at the moment. And so it'll invoke that, and Google Assistant will tell the user, sure, here's personal chef. And so we'll let the user know that now it's no longer going to be talking to Google Assistant, but now it's going to start talking to another action. And then since our action of personal chef has been invoked, we send to Google Assistant the text, and Google Assistant will translate that to speech, and then the device will actually communicate to our users, what are you in the mood for? And that's kind of how the first turn of conversation happens. The second turn is a little different, where the user will still say their phrase. And here, Google Assistant is only going to translate the speech into text. After that, it gets sent to your action, and we need to parse out that verbiage and figure out what the user means. If we need to do any data querying, we do that on our end. And then we send back a response. And then again, Google Assistant, all they're going to do is translate that text to speech and return that to the user. So the first part, Google Assistant is doing a little more, but once we take the third-party action is in the conversation, all Google Assistant is doing is translating the speech into text and text into speech. So it's one thing for me to say this. I would love to be able to show you a video of Wayne demonstrating this so you could see that interaction happening in real time.
Okay, Google, let me talk to personal chef.
Sure, here's personal chef. Hi, I'm your personal chef. What are you in the mood for?
Well, it's kind of cold outside, so I'd like something to warm me up, like a hot soup, and I want it fast.
All right, what protein would you like to use?
I have some chicken and also some canned tomatoes.
Okay, well, I think you should try the chicken tomato soup recipe I found on example.com.
Sounds good to me.
I love watching that video because that's a coworker, and it's always fun to see coworkers yeah, acting. So that was just an example of Wayne talking to Google Assistant to ask for the actions on the personal chef, and then being able to talk to that personal chef, and personal chef gave back a response of the recipe that they recommend. So something that's really interesting is the phrase that Wayne used, which is this one. Well, it's cold outside, so I would like something to warm me up, like a hot soup, and I want it fast. And this is where it gets really interesting because we have to handle this phrase. And imagine writing a regular expression to pull out these identifiers of temperature. You know, it'd be kind of challenging to figure out what exactly is he referring to. And so we do recommend using a tool called Dialog Flow to be able to support being able to parse out these interesting phrases and to figure out what the user really means. And so we have Dialog Flow that we recommend that does entity matching, where it matches and figures out what the user intends or what they mean, and it matches it up with something that we have predefined as being a functionality that we have enabled in our action. And so Dialog Flow does kind of the heavy lifting using machine learning to figure out what user says and trying to match it with our possible options, as well as entity extractions. And this is really, really fun because it pulls out certain phrases or keywords that the user has said that we need or we would want to have. What's really exciting about this component is that we could tell Dialog Flow, hey, there are these phrases that we think are really important, and anytime somebody uses or matches with this functionality or intent that we've decided is important or it's an option, I need these data points as well. And so you could think of these as parameters that you would need in your backend too. So with Dialog Flow, let's look into what this does and how it's structured. Actually, let's see where this fits in our graph that we have beforehand. So now what we have is actions on Google. There we go. So the same process happens when a user wants to talk to a third-party action like personal chef. Google Assistant will still do all of figuring out which action to serve. But instead of pinging straight into your backend to our action code, we're going to be pinging Dialog Flow. And Dialog Flow will return the welcome response to the user. And so that's the more fascinating part is down here when we're actually taking over the conversation and having to deal with the back and forthness. It's the same thing. User talks, Google Assistant will get that text, that speech, and translate it to text, and it'll send that to Dialog Flow. And now here Dialog Flow is going to figure out what the user means and what they want to be able to do, and it's going to match that up with an option that we have defined as a possibility. And then it's going to pull out any data if it's needed, and it's going to send that to our backend. And so now you can think of this where your intent is going to be calling, or that matching could be calling a function in your backend and passing in any of the entities as parameters. And then of course here in our backend, we're going to want to do our own data processing, figuring out what the user wants. And if we need, we can hit our backend or our database. And then we just return the response to Dialog Flow to Assistant, and the Assistant will translate that text to speech and send it over to the device. So that's how Dialog Flow fits in here. And so now let's check out Dialog Flow. So this is the Dialog Flow console. This connects with the Actions on Google project. And so I already have my personal chef made. And whenever you make a Dialog Flow agent, that's what a project is called in Dialog Flow, it gives you for free 2 intents. And you could think of intents similar to options. And so these are things that are options that our user can do. The first one is fallback, but I'm going to put a pin in this and we'll get back to this one. Our second one that Dialog Flow gives us is the welcome intent. So I'm going to click in here. And in here, what happens is Dialog Flow automatically puts in anytime Dialog Flow's welcome for this project gets hit, something should happen. And so I'm going to scroll down. And here we have responses. Oops, let me click that again. We have responses. And so here we can put in the response that we want to put in that our action will give back to the user. Here I have 4 different options. And the nice thing about having multiple options for a response is that Dialog Flow is going to randomly choose one for you. And so it's going to give a little bit more of a customization or a little more natural feel for the user versus every time it's saying hi and hi. It's going to say hello, good day. And of course, you could change these phrases to be even more rich as well. And so it's as easy as just adding in another phrase of hi there. I'm your personal what are you in the mood for? And so I've added that one. And I'm going to hit save. And so now I've added this phrase. So this will be another option that Dialog Flow can use. So that's one way of doing something. I'm going to go back out to intents. And now I'm going to go to a custom intent that we've built out that mimics that recipe recommendation that we modeled in the video. And here we call this recipe recommendation because that's kind of the idea of it. This part of, or this name of the intent is going to have to match with your backend. And so you want to be very mindful of what you call this because this is how you're going to be able to address this intent in your backend. But here, because this isn't something that Dialog Flow has given us for free, that's something that we're making, we have to add in training phrases. So here you add in phrases where you try to mimic how the user can say something to invoke this particular intent. And so I just added a couple of different phrases, like I want some chicken, I want a very quick meal, I like a cold dessert and I want it now. So Dialog Flow understands a lot of different data points where it understands the concept of time and days of the week, proper names, surnames, and many other things. And you could definitely look that up on Dialog Flow in regards to entities that have been built in. So they're called system entities. But for this one in particular, I wanted something where I can identify what type of food they're going to be looking at. So something like chicken is going to be very different than lamb. And those data points are important to me. And so I actually made custom entities. And so Dialog Flow can use those. So let me show you first, before we keep going, on how you can make a custom entity. So we're going to go over here to the left under entities. And in here, I made a couple of different kind of ideas that I want to have information about when I need it. And so I'm going to just go into this idea of a protein. So for every recipe, I want to be able to identify what type of protein the user would want, because it would help me be able to query the best recipe for them. And so here, I've just called it protein. And on the left-hand side, I have beef, chicken, tofu, and lamb. And on the right, for each one, there are synonyms of that one word. So you could call beef, beef, or steak, or brisket. And so here you can have more synonyms of that word. And what's really nice is on your back end, when you actually have to process this data, the variable is going to be called protein in your back end. And if they say steak, it will get reduced down to beef. And so now you only have to worry about a limited number of possible options for every variable that you've identified or entity that you've identified. So this is really nice because it helps clean up your code significantly by being able to have this reduced down to 1. That way you can have that. If you're, for some reason, want to have the difference between beef, steak, and brisket, you wouldn't do this. But for this example, they're talking about something that is a cow byproduct or a cow product. I want that to be reduced down to beef. So I'm going to go back to the intent in which I'm using these. Go back to recipe recommendation. And here, if I click on chicken, you'll notice that here it says protein, protein. And so this is a custom entity that I've made that's protein, and it's identified that as well. If I scroll down, you'll be able to see different type of system entities. And so this is other things that Dialog Flow is familiar with and is aware of, which is nice. But you can see up here is my custom ones first. So I've given enough training phrases. Ideally, you want to have at least 15 training phrases. And a nice way of being able to get these type of training phrases is literally asking the person, another person, hey, how would you say this? To be able to get a richer data set in regards to training phrases. So once we have that, I'm going to scroll down. And here we have actions and parameters. This section is where it would list down all of the entities that you've identified to be important, but not necessarily required to be able to invoke this particular intent, except for this one that's protein. And so I've defined, hey, if you want to use this intent, I'm going to need some type of protein source to be able to query out in the back end a recipe for you. So I've identified that being important, but I could say also a vegetable is important or not. What's nice about here too is that here you could click on prompts and you could put in the prompt if the user did not say the protein or identified a protein. So you can even put in what type of protein would you like? And you could be even more helpful by having like beef or chicken. And of course, you can give different options as well. And then that will help Dialog Flow be able to do a random on each of the, or on one of these, so that it could give the user one of these responses. And so with that, I'm going to scroll down. And here I have it where it is just doing a static response. Anytime the user says something, I'm going to give the static response of great. Let's have whatever that protein variable or that information for that protein variable is here. And so this isn't necessarily the best way to do this type of approach. We want to have this connect to our backend. And so instead of having this defaulted in here, we're going to scroll down and click on fulfillment. And here you can enable fulfillment. And now with this, it's going to call your backend with a webhook, and it's going to be able to dynamically, now you could dynamically use that protein entity in your backend to be able to return a recipe for the user. So again, this is just an example of an intent in the context of this personal chef project. There's a lot of really fun things that you could do in here. One thing I will also point out is integration. So in here, you click on here, not going to save any of that. And then here is where you could integrate it into your Google Assistant. I've already done that. And so I'm going to just click on, this is the actions on Google Console. That is part of the personal chef. And I'm going to test this out here. So it drops me into the test section of the simulator. And so this whole thing is going to mimic how it's going to look like for the user. So I'm going to click on talk to my test app, because right now it's not named in my actions on Google. I'm going to click on this, or I could also click on this microphone and speak to it. Oh, click enter.
Okay, let's get the test version of my test app.
Greetings, I'm your personal chef. What are you in the mood for?
Oh. And so on the right-hand side, you can see how that's going to look for the user. And here I'm going to just put, I want chicken.
Great, let's have chicken.
And so this is going to be, this is the default response that we had chosen prior for this intent. So here, I'm going to go back to my Dialog Flow console. I'm going to go back to the intents. I'm going to go to the recipe intents, or recipe recommendation intents. And then down here, I could change this to be like yummy protein. I'm going to hit save. And then just note down here, the intent's being saved. But if I added new training phrases, it will also start up the training for the machine learning for the mesh map for Dialog Flow, so then it can process all of these training phrases, especially if I add a new one. Since I didn't, this one went fairly quickly, which is great. So let's go back to the console for actions on Google. I'm going to go over here to the right. I'm going to hit reset. And I can also click this button to talk to my test app.
Sure, here's the test version of my test app.
Hi there, I'm your personal chef. What are you in the mood for?
Want some tofu.
Yummy tofu.
Awesome. So that's just a quick example of being able to make some edits in Dialog Flow and it being able to affect your action, because Dialog Flow is between your Google Assistant being able to call to your backend. And currently this one has no backend. My backend is solely Dialog Flow. Something else I want to point out in here is that we do have an option to see the request and response objects, as well as being able to play with the audio here. And so there's going to be something that I'll present later on, and this is where you can edit audio. So just keep that in mind, as well as the all important errors, because it happens to all of us. And so it'll tell you if there's an error as well. So I'm going to go back to our slides. Fantastic. No one's interrupted me, so I'm going to assume we have no questions. Okay.
Hi, Jessica. Sorry, actually there is a question you want to take.
Yeah, of course. Let's see. Okay. Is it possible to have responses chosen based on the user's speaking style? Tara, I would love a little bit more information of what you mean about speaking style. If you could add a little more context of that, that'd be great. Oh, formality. Like, are you talking about languages in which there is a certain level of formality? Or are you talking more about if someone's being formal to me, I should respond as formal, and if they're more casual, I should respond more casually? Oh, if they're being, okay, cool. So if they're being formal or casual, at the moment, we usually recommend where your action has its own persona and its own personality, where it's independent of the user. Of course, with that, you could do some more customization. That's generally more advanced. So let's talk offline. I would love to talk to you more about this, but tomorrow, Kathy will go more into details of designing your action in regards to its personality. Okay, and I'll be on the Slack channel later today too, Tara, so you could definitely ping me in Slack. Cool. Want to make sure. Is there other questions on the Slack channel? If you put them in the Slack channel, we'll definitely respond to them. It just right now, it's hard to do that back and forth. Cool. Fantastic. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Okay, so we did the demo. Now let's talk about different options that you could do, because Dialog Flow is a tool that you could use that makes it a lot easier when you're building conversational actions. So we mentioned conversational design is really important, and tomorrow we have a whole talk on this. As a developer myself, when I was building my first action, I saw the conversational design docs and I was like, skip, 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 because I come from web design where I have a lot of control of the structure, and then I usually put the content in after. You could build a website without having all the pieces. And so coming from that space, I made the mistake of assuming this will be the same thing when it comes to voice, and it's not. So be better than me and save yourself a lot of headache by really spending some time building out your conversational design as well. And so we have a whole site based off of this. And what's really nice is it gives you the kind of the idea of what you want to do. And it also gives you an example of this is a good way of doing it, and this is not a good way of doing it as well. And so I know for me, when people just show me what's the good way or just the bad way or not to do, I tend to be in this weird middle ground. So this really gives you nice concrete ways of being able to design your conversation using the best design principles as well. Another tip I have, especially for developers too, is if you don't have a designer who's a VUI, a voice user interface designer, you can always go around and asking people to model the behavior. So get 2 random people, ideally. Of course, most likely you'll know them, but get 2 people and have one person be the user and the other person be the action. And just ask them to make up the conversation and record it. I recommend recording it, actually doing the audio recording. That way you're not missing any of the small nuances, because generally whenever we type very formally, but when we speak, we're a little more informal. And so this is a nice recommendation that I know I use whenever I'm building something out. And if I don't have access to a designer immediately, I usually ask a couple of people, like, I have the scenario, how would you do it? So that's an option. Another thing when you're designing is to think about the different surface capabilities. And so there are times where we have devices that have an audio only input and a screen only input, and then we have devices that do both. And so, for example, my phone can be on any of these options and be a combination of the two. So when it's silent or when I have my audio off, it's screen only. And when I don't, I could use the audio only or do the blend. We recommend designing your conversational actions thinking of audio only, because one, it's a little harder to do, and it puts you in the space of being able to truly figure out the conversation, as well as the screens. Those options and features that you could do for screen capable devices are to support and to enhance the conversation. And that way you're not falling into the same kind of thought process if you are a web designer or an app designer, where we base a lot of how users interact with our applications is through a GUI. So recommendation, do conversation or voice first conversational design. Something I want to bring to everyone's awareness is that we do have a client library, and it is in Node.js. And the way that's written, in my opinion, is actually fantastic and beautiful in regards to how it is really simple and clear. And so for those who are not familiar with JavaScript, all the first line is doing is pretty much getting all the requirements from Actions on Google, getting all that information. And then it makes an instance of Dialog Flow that we're going to call app. And then here, all you have to do is app.intent. And then this tell fact is the intent name in the Dialog Flow. And so this is going to have to match perfectly. And so this, for the personal chef example, would be the recipe recommendation, would be here. It passes the conversational object, and this is an object that gets passed around throughout the whole conversation. And then here, if someone invoked the tell fact, Dialog Flow would ping here. And then all we have to do is com.ask and then passing in a string. And what happens here is that it sends this string to Dialog Flow, which again sends it to Google Assistant, and Google Assistant will translate this text into speech to the user. And then the second line, com.ask, is suggestions, which is suggestion chips. And I'll put a pin in that, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a slide or two. And then that's it. If you want to have a very simple, like, hello world example, that's all you have to do in your backend. And so for our recipe recommendation, we would change this out. And then here, instead of doing a conversational.ask, most likely we're going to want to be able to get the parameter of the protein, which we just have to modify this to pass in params. So it'll be comma params, and then grab the parameter and be able to do our own query into our database, grab the recipe, and then add in the com.ask. We recommend this recipe, and then that's it. So in my opinion, I think this is fantastic. So let us know what you think about it. So that's the most simplest way of being able to respond to your user. Then we have this idea of simple response, which you could pass in the speech text and the text. So the speech text is what Google Assistant will actually say. And then the text is what the user will see. And so for this example, the verbiage is the same, except in the speech, it has like 42 versus the text. And so you can have these be different as well. And generally, whenever you're doing your speech, sometimes you want to play with the grammar because of how it sounds. And so this is a way that you could edit the way your speech sounds compared to the text. And of course, we could enhance this because now that we did the speech and making that the voice the primary, we could use something like suggestion chips here to supplement and give support to the visual component. And so here we actually have suggestion chips that the user could click on for that. So that's one really fun thing to do. We also have basic cards, which is, it shows an image and you could have text and you can have a button and it can link out to something else. And it's a lot richer information. And so if you have something that you want to provide a lot of content for on the visual aspect, you could have this as well. Other things that you could do is we have lists and carousels and browsing carousels. And so you could display information in different ways to your user too. Of course, this is only for screen devices. So you have to be mindful of how you use these things and when you use them. When it comes to speech, something that's really exciting is SSML, which is Speech Synthetic Markup Language. And what that means is you can modify your speech to a higher degree as well. And so we have the speech tag, and then we have a closed speech tag. And then inside of there, we have different tags that do different things. And so I'm going to just use, for example, the first one, say as, interpret as, characters. And so what happens here is this SSML, Google Assistant will not read it as small. It's actually going to say SSML, which is really nice. And so you can make these type of edits. I would love to show you, this is from Google I/O, somebody who used audio and did many tracks and edited the speech, and so it sounds different. So I'm going to play this audio so we could see the different tracks and how it all comes together to build a really rich audio experience. Oh, if I clicked on it.
Come in. Welcome to the terrifying world of the imagination.
That one makes me so happy because it's one of those, it reminds me of the early 1900s where the radio was the only source of media, or the latest source of media, where there was a lot of storylines and adventure stories that was all audio. And this is just so much fun. So you could do things as rich as this to be able to give your users a fantastic experience as well. Another thing that lots of people ask for is, you want to be able to provide more custom information for the user, and you need to know things about the user. And so we do have permissions where you can ask the user for different data points. And of course, at Google, we believe about consent and getting the user to say it's okay, approval when we give out any information. And so you could use things like this for this example, where if you're offering to look for a bookstore for the user, you can ask for the course location or the device course location, which means you're asking for the mobile device's zip code. Oh, I'm sorry, for the zip code of the city of the home. For mobile device, that is not an option. And what happens here is Google Assistant takes over the conversation and asks the user, is it okay to provide your zip code to this third-party action because they want to find bookstores near you? And this is where on our back end, we have to handle whether the user says it's okay or not, but you can ask for information like this as well. Another way of asking for information or getting more customized experience for your user is account linking. And so if you have if you want to be able to connect their Google account with your action, you could use the assistant only, Google sign-in only option for account linking, which is it's the most seamless way or frictionless way to get your user to connect their account with your action. Or let's say if you have another application on another platform that people have already signed in and Google isn't the only provider for identity, then you could use the multi-platform option as well. And so you can connect their Google account with your action and be able to provide any custom experiences that they or make available anything that they may be perhaps paid for or there's a loyalty program for as well. So you can connect this with your users. And then you can also do transactions with the users where you could build physical goods. You can also use different payment processors as well. Just a heads up, right now, users are not completely comfortable doing all of this through voice. And so being able to provide information to your users, or at least an option of, hey, do you want to finish this transaction on your cell phone or be able to finish this another way is always nice versus not giving them that option. Most likely in the future, people will be way more okay with it. Similarly, I like to think of this of, 10 years ago, a lot of people were not comfortable buying clothes on the internet. And now a lot of folks buy their clothes. And I've actually haven't bought any garments in a actual physical store in 2 years because now I'm comfortable with it. And so it might be something with time that we're working on, but the options are there and we're getting users are starting to know that this is an option. So more ways to connect. These are different ways you could try out actions on Google. One of them is sample actions, where let's say you are like, oh my gosh, this function is, or this functionality is really interesting. We have a list of about 8 different sample actions where you click this one button and it builds the whole Dialog Flow agent for you. And so for this one, you could see SSML, audio, daily updates, routines, suggestions, and built-in intents, and be able to try that out without having to build everything on your own. So this is another way that you can get started really quickly by building the Dialog Flow agent for you. Another way that you can connect with Google Assistant actions on Google is having a smart home device integration as well. Generally, at least for me, when I'm turning on or off my lights, I don't need a full conversation. And so generally you want to take a different path when it comes to development for smart home integrations. That way you could just say, hey, turn off the lights without going, hey lights, how are you feeling? And like actually talking to them. So there's this option too. So if you have a smart home device integration, please go here to get more details. And then these are just examples of Assistant SDK for devices. So you could connect it to many different things. The one on the left is an example from a couple of IOs ago where you can actually ask it to make a cocktail for you. And so it made a custom cocktail or made a cocktail for you. And so you could do really fun things like that. It doesn't always have to be just for business, but you could do a lot of fun things that you want to create on your own. So we spent all this time building these actions, building all of this customize and giving users the best experience, but how do we actually get users to know about what we've done? And so there's 2 ways to trigger an action. And one is explicit triggering, where you use the phrase, okay, Google, talk to, and then the name of the action. Or you could do, okay, Google, talk to the name of the action, and then the action phrase. And so this would be the intent. So this would hit our recipe recommendation intent, that the user wants a hot soup. So it would bypass our welcome and go straight into it. And so this first one will be most likely what most users use. And then the second one will be users who are familiar with their action can kind of go directly into the parts that they want. So that's one way, by them saying the actual name of your action. The other way is implicit triggering, where people go, hey, Google, I kind of want this thing. I want to do yoga. I'm interested in meditation. I want to meditate. And so Google will try to match the action based off what the user wants to do. And I usually like to tell people this is similar to when you go on Google, the actual website, and do a Google search. Google will try to figure out which websites are the best or more appropriate or the highest recommended. We do our own thing. Similar to here, we do our own thing to try to figure out which would be the best one for the user to be able to, and we'll serve that to them. We also have a directory as well. So this is really similar to Android Play Store, where people could go and find out the latest and greatest. And we have tons of options, and you could see all the actions that are currently available. as well. And with that, you could send users the link to your particular action. So every action has its own URL, and you could send this out to users, whether it be on social media or through an email blast, to let people know that this action exists and that you could use it too. Something with this too that I wanted to make sure I pointed out was that when it comes to invoking the action, I'm going to go back a couple slides. When it comes to the explicit triggering, you don't have to install or download anything. So anytime an action has been approved and is on our system directory, any device has access, all devices have access to all of the actions. And so I can go to my parents' house, or I can go to my in-laws or my friends, and I could talk to Personal Chef if that action was available anywhere. So that's really nice, where it's not, you don't have to do any installation or be able to figure out XYZ. It's just saying the words. So let me go back. Something, again, I wanted to share with everybody, especially with this group, is we do have an Actions on Google Community Program. This is really exciting because when you publish your first action, you'll be automatically invited to this program, and you get a really cool shirt. And then as well as 200 cloud credits per month for a year. Let me say that again. 200 cloud credits per month for a year. So you'll be able to do some really, really cool things as well. And then we also have milestones too. So even after that, if you have a lot of traction with users, or if you have a lot of traction, or you get a lot of engagement with your users, or you translate your action to multiple languages, we do have pins as well. So it's a really fun community group, and we love to see what people build too. So transitioning to the next, we're going to be doing code labs. And so want to make sure, please sign up into the AI Camp Slack group, because that is where we're going to be answering questions after this talk. And we'll be there for another hour and be able to support you through the code lab too. So click on this, make sure that you're in the Slack group if you want to get any support. But before you go away, click it so then it opens it, or put the URL so then you have it open at least. And then what we're going to be doing is Code Lab Level 1. So I'll put this in the Slack group as well, so you don't have to worry about double clicking on this. The first one is for this one in particular, for our Voice Developer Week console. This will take you to the Actions on Google console as well. So that way it has something on there where it's a special code. That way we know who's building what, which is exciting. And then the link for the actual code lab that we'll be working on too. So I'll be adding these two to the Slack. So again, the Slack invite is on the bottom of the slide deck, and we'll most likely put this in the Zoom channel too. So that'll be there. And then also, if you are on a computer, I recommend doing a screenshot of this. This is just a list of different resources that you could use. I'll also put this in the Slack as well. But this will have the link for the documentation if you're interested in just doing the Actions SDK. If you'll be building out your backend, here's just more information. But the code lab that we'll be doing today will really guide us through everything. But this is just in case you want something addition after this hour. And another thing too is we're really active on Google+. So if you want to connect to the community, you could definitely go there. If you have technical questions outside of this event, definitely on Stack Overflow, feel free to tag Actions on Google or Dialog Flow, depending on your problem. That way we could find you. And then once you do have your action published, or if you just want to do a shout out of how great this event is, definitely feel free to use the AOG Devs hashtag on Twitter. We'd love to see what people are building as well. So with that, I'm going to put it back to here so people can see that. And I'm good. I'm done. So thank you everybody so much for your support. Oh, sweet. Someone's already done that for me. You guys are so great. I'll be answering questions in Slack. Would that work? Or should I answer whatever's in Zoom now?
I think let's move to Slack for the QA part, because that one, we can save all of the questions too. So for the one question is, is for the next 1 hour, we're going to working on the code lab. Is that one? Do we need to have like a little bit like introduction on that code lab, or for the attendees, they can just click the link and get started to follow the steps?
Yeah, definitely. It is something where it's designed where people could just click on. So I'm going to just model it. So we're going to first click on this. So this is going to open our actions on Google console. So now we have the console. And I'm going to go back to the slides. And then here, this is the code lab. And it will literally guide you. So this is an overview. A lot of this is information I've already given. But this is what you'll be learning in the code lab. You're going to understand how it works, how to create a Dialog Flow agent, how to define training phrases, and you'll be actually building all of this out. The only thing that you need is a web browser, preferably Chrome. And then you can just keep going. And so after you read this, you hit next, and then you just keep going. And this gives you a lot more context. A lot of this I've kind of mentioned, but it's always best to read it so you have a better understanding. And then finally on step 3, that's where you actually start building, and you start with a console. So since you have the console open already, then you could just name it and continue from there. So this should be very self-explanatory, but again, this is why we're going to be in the, I will put that in the Slack channel right now. This is why.
Okay, great. I think with those informations, those self-guided steps, we should be able to get started working on. And we're going to move to the Slack channel again for all of the question and answers discussions. By the way, if you guys also want to post this event on the Twitter, you can using the hashtag IOG online. And also at Jessica and AI Camp. I'm going to post the information to the chat window too. So yeah, let's working on the code lab to see if we can build something from the code lab.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. We're going to still keep the room open here. And in case you have any questions.
Oh, I can answer questions on Slack if that makes it easier. If you want to keep it open and maybe putting a page up just in case if other people sign in.
Right. Yeah. We will bring up a page saying we are working on the code lab right now and have QS on Slack channel. Yeah,
that would be fantastic. And I'll send you the links too.
Okay, cool.
I'll put it in the Zoom too. There we go. It's in the Zoom right now. That way it'll be easier for you just to grab those.
Great.
Awesome. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Jessica.